Look around the room you're sitting in right now. I mean, whether you're in your living room or an office or maybe a coffee shop, you probably perceive the space between you and the walls as well as empty.
Right, yeah, just empty air.
Exactly. The air is just empty space. And when we think about understanding what happens in that space, knowing if someone walks in or sits down or, heaven forbid, falls over, we default to thinking about human vision.
Yeah, we think about cameras.
Right, cameras. Light hits a lens or it gets blocked by a wall. It's a very binary, very clean, visible way of categorizing the world. We inherently trust what we can see.
Which is, a completely natural human bias. I mean, we map our understanding of sensing and perception directly to our own biology.
Yeah.
If a wall blocks our eyes, we just assume it blocks perception entirely. But the reality of the modern environment is it's fundamentally different. That empty air around you is actually this dense, vibrating, totally invisible ocean of electromagnetic geometry.
And that invisible ocean is exactly what we're exploring today. We're taking a soothing, deeply focused journey into a technological shift that is actively, right now, redefining the spaces we live in.
It really is.
We're looking at a standard known as IEEE 802.11bf, or more commonly it's called Wi-Fi sensing, WLAN sensing. And for this deep dive, we've pulled together some incredible source material. We've got cutting-edge academic papers, including these wild R-Corv preprints on multi-band passive sensing.
Oh yeah, the Milagro paper.
Yes. We have IE standard overviews, market research projections extending all the way out to 2034, and some really deep dive cybersecurity analyses regarding the privacy implications of all this.
Because there are massive privacy implications.
Huge. So our mission today is to understand how the ordinary Wi-Fi signals filling our homes, the invisible waves you're probably using right now to stream this audio or scroll through the internet, how they're evolving. They're transforming from a simple delivery mechanism for data into a pervasive, invisible sensory network.
Yeah, it represents a massive paradigm shift in engineering. I mean, historically, the Wi-Fi router sitting in your hallway had one job, right? Be a digital mail carrier.
Just moving packets back and forth.
Exactly. It delivered packets of data from the internet to your phone and from your phone back out to the internet. But the very physics required to deliver those packets mean the router has to interact with the physical environment.
Right.
And now that infrastructure is literally learning to feel the room. It's becoming capable of detecting everything from where you are standing to the tiny, millimeter level movements of your chest as you breathe.
Which is wild.
And it is doing this without a single camera and without you needing to wear a smartwatch or carry any kind of sensor.
That concept, a router that just feels the room without cameras, it sounds almost like science fiction. But it's grounded in some incredibly elegant physics. To truly grasp how this works, we really need to understand a concept that engineers call ISAC.
Right, ISAC. Integrated Sensing and Communication.
Yeah. So how does a Wi-Fi signal fundamentally transition from, sending a text message to knowing that a human being just walked into the kitchen?
Well, the answer lies in the fundamental nature of radio frequency, or RF, waves. When your router wants to send a signal to your laptop, it doesn't fire a single laser-straight beam of energy.
Right, it's not a laser pointer.
No, not at all. It broadcasts radio waves that propagate outward in multiple directions.
Like throwing a pebble into a pond?
That is a perfect analogy, yeah. Like ripples spreading from a pebble dropped in a still pond. And as those waves travel across your living room, they interact with everything in their path.
Everything.
They bounce off the hard surface of the walls. They scatter when they hit the complex angles of, a coffee table. They're partially absorbed by the soft fabric of your couch. And crucially, they reflect off of human bodies.
Because from the perspective of a radio wave, a human being is essentially just a dense, mobile bag of water.
I mean, it sounds a bit gross, but that is a highly accurate way to look at it. Because the human body has a high water content and very specific dielectric properties, we are very significant obstructions in an RF field.
We're getting away.
We cause major disturbances. So now imagine you are the laptop receiving this Wi-Fi signal. By the time that wave reaches your antenna, it isn't just one clean wave anymore.
It's a mess.
It is a fractured, messy, overlapping series of signals. Some waves arrived directly, some bounced off the ceiling and arrived a fraction of a millisecond later, and some bounced off the person walking through the room.
It sounds like an echo chamber. I mean, if you were trying to listen to someone whispering to you in a massive echoing cathedral, you'd really struggle to understand the actual words because of all the bouncing sound.
Which was exactly the headache Wi-Fi engineers faced for decades. They called it multipath interference.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it was considered a severe problem that degraded data transmission. To fix this, modern Wi-Fi devices constantly measure all those different bounces and echoes to figure out how to filter them out and rebuild the original signal.
So they can ignore the room.
Right. They perform this mathematical measurement using something called channel state information, or CSI.
Okay, so the device actively maps out the distortion. It calculates exactly how the environment deformed the signal on its journey, just so it can smooth it out and keep the internet running smoothly.
Historically, yes. The device would calculate the channel state information, use it to equalize the signal, grab the data packet, and then it would just immediately discard the CSI. It threw it away.
Oh, wow.
The brilliant realization of Wi-Fi sensing, the real aha moment for researchers, was recognizing that this discarded CSI is actually a highly detailed, real-time map of the physical environment.
The trash was actually treasure.
Exactly. By holding onto the CSI and analyzing how it fluctuates over time, the communication link itself becomes the sensor. You are analyzing the ripples.
If we go back to the pond analogy, that makes perfect sense. I mean, if you know exactly what the ripples are supposed to look like when the pond is perfectly still, any sudden disruption in those ripples tells you something has entered the water.
Right.
A weird waves or a sudden splash means a rock or a fish or a person is disturbing the surface.
Yeah.
But my immediate thought is power consumption. If my router is suddenly acting like an active radar system, constantly scanning the environment, isn't that going to consume a massive amount of electricity?
Well, that is the beauty of integrated sensing and communication. It is incredibly energy efficient precisely because it is not a traditional active radar.
Okay.
Active radar systems, like the ones used in aviation or weather tracking, they require dedicated power-hungry hardware to illuminate a scene. They blast massive amounts of energy into the sky specifically to read the reflections.
Right, spinning radar dishes and all that.
Yeah, but Wi-Fi sensing, particularly the passive models we are discussing from the sources, they simply eavesdrop on the ripples that are already happening.
Because the devices are already constantly talking to each other anyway.
Exactly. Your router is already sending out beacon frames to announce its presence. Your phone is already sending background data packets. The receiver simply records the channel estimates produced during these normal ongoing operations.
So it's basically free.
Pretty much. The energy footprint is astonishingly small. We're talking about passive sensing operations functioning at microwatt levels. Specifically, the research notes between 48 and 371 microwatts in some implementations.
Wow.
You don't need a specialized radar dish. Every single joule of energy spent transmitting your data is simultaneously doubling as a sonar ping. It's elegantly repurposing the ambient energy already flowing through your home.
Okay, so the router is passively reading the channel state information, measuring how the room distorts the signal. But how does it translate a messy radio reflection into knowing exactly where I am? I mean, the underlying physics must involve some very clever math. How does the router determine distance?
So the foundational metric for distance is called time of flight.
Time of flight.
Okay. Conceptually, it's straightforward. It's a measurement of how long a signal takes to travel from the transmitter, bounce off a target, like your body, and return to the receiver.
Right. Distance equals speed times time.
Exactly. If you know the speed of the wave and you know how long the round trip took, you can calculate the distance to the object.
Well, wait, we are talking about radio waves. Radio waves move at the speed of light.
They do.
They cross a living room in a fraction of a nanosecond. Measuring the time of flight for something moving at the speed of light seems, practically impossible for a consumer-grade home router.
You're totally right. It is practically impossible to measure it as a simple stopwatch calculation on consumer hardware. The clocks inside a standard Wi-Fi chip simply aren't precise enough to measure nanosecond round trips directly.
So how do they do it?
Instead of measuring the time directly, they calculate it indirectly by looking at the phase slope across different subcarriers.
Phase slope across subcarriers. Okay, we're gonna need to break that down. What is a subcarrier and what is a phase slope?
Okay, think of a modern Wi-Fi connection not as a single solid beam, but as a multi-lane highway.
Okay.
The overall Wi-Fi channel is divided into many smaller lanes, which are the subcarriers. The router sends data down all these lanes simultaneously. Now, a radio wave has a phase, meaning it has peaks and troughs like a wave in the ocean.
Right.
When the signal travels through space, the phase shifts depending on how far it has traveled.
So if I throw a rock in a pond, the wave goes up and down. If I measure the wave close to the rock, it might be at a peak. If I measure a little further away, it might be at a trough.
That is the phase, because the different subcarriers, the different lanes on the highway, are at slightly different frequencies. Their wavelengths are slightly different.
Ah, okay.
As they travel the exact same distance to bounce off you and return, their phases will shift by slightly different amounts. By comparing the phase shifts across all these different lanes, the router calculates a slope.
The phase slope.
Yes. The steepness of that mathematical slope directly corresponds to the exact distance the signal traveled. It is a brilliant mathematical workaround to measure the speed of light using the phase relationships of different frequencies.
That is deeply fascinating. By comparing the lanes, it infers the distance without needing a nanosecond stopwatch. So that solves the how far away is the person question.
Right.
But distance alone just gives you a radius. I could be 10 feet away in the kitchen or 10 feet away in the hallway.
Yeah.
How does the router know my spatial location? How does it map me in 3D space?
That requires moving from distance to direction using a metric called angle of arrival or angle of departure.
Okay.
And this relies on the physical hardware of modern routers. Take a look at a high-end router today. It usually looks a bit like a robotic spider, right? Covered in multiple antennas.
Yeah, the ones that look like a spaceship.
Exactly. That is called a MIMO array. Multiple input, multiple output.
Having multiple antennas is what allows the spatial mapping.
Yes, because it creates a physical geometry at the receiver. When a radio wave bounces off you and travels back toward the router, it doesn't hit the entire router at the exact same instant.
Because the antennas are spread out.
Right. If you are standing slightly to the left of the router, the returning wave will hit the leftmost antenna a tiny fraction of a picosecond before it hits the rightmost antenna.
Which means the wave will be at a slightly different phase when it hits the left antenna compared to the right antenna.
You've got it. The system measures those minuscule size differences across the array of antennas. By analyzing the delta between antenna 1, antenna 2, and antenna 3, the system can triangulate the exact angle the reflection came from.
Oh, wow.
Combined with the distance calculation we just discussed, the router can now plot your location in 2D or even 3D space within the room.
So we have distance and we have location. But looking at the papers, the most astonishing capability of this invisible ocean is its ability to measure movement. And not just large movements like walking, but microscopic movements. This brings us to the Doppler effect. Now, most of us understand the Doppler effect intuitively from sound. Right.
The classic ambulance example.
Right. If an ambulance is driving towards you, the sound waves are compressed and the siren sounds higher in pitch. As it drives away, the sound waves are stretched and the pitch drops. How does a Wi-Fi router utilize this?
It applies the exact same principle, but to radio frequencies instead of sound waves. It measures the Doppler frequency shift. When radio waves bounce off a moving object, the frequency of the reflected wave shifts slightly.
So if I walk toward the router,
the reflected waves are compressed, creating a positive frequency shift. If you walk away, they stretch, creating a negative shift.
Which allows the router to measure my velocity.
Yes, but the sensitivity of modern Wi-Fi signals allows this to operate at an almost microscopic scale. It captures what researchers call microdoppler signatures.
Microdoppler.
Yeah, it isn't just detecting your gross bodily movement across the room. It can detect the tiny, localized movements of specific body parts.
Which means it can detect the physical mechanics of breathing.
Because when you are sitting perfectly still on your living room couch, reading a book, your body is not actually static. Your chest cavity is expanding and contracting by a few millimeters with every single breath.
That's incredible.
That tiny physical displacement is enough to physically nudge the 5 gigahertz radio waves bouncing off your torso. The router detects that incredibly subtle rhythmic compression and stretching of the frequency.
It just sees the chest rising and falling.
It can literally read your respiration rate, and in some advanced setups, even your heart rate, without a single wire, camera, or wearable device touching your body.
That paints a remarkable picture. The empty air in our homes is actually a highly sensitive detection field. However, not all radio waves are created equal, are they?
No, definitely not.
The physical size of the ripple dictates what it can and cannot see. And looking at the architecture of the 802.101 of BFF standard, it heavily relies on 2 very different types of Wi-Fi waves. The physics of these 2 bands are so different that engineers effectively had to solve 2 entirely separate sensing problems.
That is a crucial distinction to make. The standard operates primarily across 2 vast frequency domains: the sub-7 GHz band and the 60 gigahertz millimeter wave band.
Okay.
To understand how a smart environment truly perceives us, we have to understand the vastly different physics of these two flavors of sensing.
Let's unpack the sub-7 gigahertz band first. This category includes the 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and the newer 6 gigahertz bands. These are the frequencies we use every day. Our laptops, our smart TVs, our phones, they all live in this space. What is the sensing profile of these sub-7 gigahertz waves?
Think of the sub-7 gigahertz band as a broad, sweeping brush. These waves operate at lower frequencies, which means their physical wavelengths are longer, roughly around 5 to 12 centimeters long.
Yeah.
The defining superpower of a longer wavelength is penetration. These waves can easily pass through drywall, wooden doors, and heavy furniture.
Which makes them excellent for non-line-of-sight sensing.
Yes. If your router is sitting in the living room and you want to know if someone is walking around in the bedroom down the hall, the sub-7 gigahertz band is the tool for the job. It provides phenomenal whole room occupancy detection. It can see large, macro movements right through the walls of your house.
But there's a fundamental trade-off in physics. Because the wavelength is 5 to 12 centimeters long, it physically cannot detect details smaller than itself.
Right.
It is like trying to paint a highly detailed portrait using a thick, clumsy house painting roller.
That is the exact limitation. The longer the wavelength, the lower the spatial resolution. A 5 gigahertz wave is fantastic for knowing that you are in the bedroom, and it can detect the rhythmic rise and fall of your chest because your whole torso is moving, but it cannot track the movement of your fingers. Furthermore, the sub-7 gigahertz bands are incredibly congested environments. Your neighbor's Wi-Fi network, your Bluetooth headphones, even your microwave oven, they all create massive electromagnetic interference in these bands. So the signal is broad, it penetrates walls, but it is relatively blurry and noisy.
Which requires introducing the second flavor of sensing, the 60 gigahertz millimeter wave band. If sub-7 gigahertz is the thick house painting roller, 60 gigahertz is the ultra-fine tipped architectural pen.
The 60 gigahertz band operates in a completely different physical reality. Because the frequency is so extraordinarily high, the physical wavelengths are tiny, literally measured in millimeters.
Hence, millimeter wave.
Exactly. In addition to the tiny wavelength, the 60 gigahertz band operates on massive channel bandwidths. While a normal 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi channel might be 80 or 160 megahertz wide, a 60 gigahertz channel can be upwards of 2.16 gigahertz wide.
That is a massive highway for data.
And a massive highway for sensing resolution. This combination of millimeter wavelengths and massive bandwidth allows for an incredible level of spatial precision. A 60 gigahertz sensing system can map the micro movements of your hand. It can recognize subtle, complex gestures in thin air. It creates a high-definition radar image of the space.
But there's a massive catch. If I remember my radio physics correctly, a 60 gigahertz wave is incredibly fragile. The higher the frequency, the faster it degrades.
Very true.
A 60 gigahertz signal is blocked by almost everything. A simple plaster wall stops it dead. Even the oxygen molecules in the ambient air physically absorb the energy of a 60 gigahertz wave.
Which is exactly why it is strictly a line-of-sight technology. It cannot penetrate walls. If a person walks behind a thick couch, they effectively vanish from the perspective of a 60 gigahertz sensor.
If the signal is that fragile, how does a router even use it effectively? I mean, it can't just broadcast it in a wide sphere like a 5 gigahertz signal, because the energy would dissipate instantly.
Right. To solve that fragility, 60 gigahertz devices use a process called beamforming training. Instead of shouting in all directions, the router uses an array of microscopic antennas to mathematically steer the signal into a highly focused, concentrated beam.
Like a spotlight.
Think of it like a lighthouse sweeping a focused beam of light across a dark, foggy harbor. The router sweeps this beam across the room, analyzing the reflections to find the optimal path to the target. It creates an incredibly precise but highly localized line-of-sight connection.
So I have an engineering dilemma here. The sub-7 gigahertz band can see through walls, but the image is blurry and low resolution.
Yeah.
The 60 gigahertz band provides a 4K ultra-high definition map of your tiny movements, but it is instantly blinded the moment you step behind a sheet of drywall.
Yeah, that's the problem.
For a smart home to function seamlessly where people are constantly walking behind furniture and moving between rooms, you somehow need both.
You have to fuse them together. You have to create a system that can gracefully hand off the perception from one frequency to the other based on the environment. And this is where the academic research we reviewed is yielding incredible results. One of the standout preprints we're analyzing proposed a deep learning model called Milagro.
Milagro, I love that acronym. It stands for Multi-Band Intelligence Learning for Generalized Recognition and Observation.
Very catchy.
It sounds incredibly complex, but the underlying concept is essentially giving the router binocular vision using two different types of light.
Yeah.
How does the Milagro neural network actually merge the blurry, well-penetrating vision with the high-definition line of sight vision?
The architecture of Milagro is a fascinating piece of machine learning engineering. It uses a two-block convolutional neural network, or CNN. The system is designed to ingest the raw channel state information from both the 60 gigahertz band and the 5 gigahertz band simultaneously.
But it doesn't just mash the data together, right? It processes them sequentially to save computing power.
Exactly. Block 1 of the neural network is dedicated entirely to the 60 gigahertz millimeter wave data. Why start there? Because when the 60 gigahertz signal has a clear line of sight, its data is incredibly trustworthy and accurate. The neural network applies a 1D convolutional layer to this high-res data.
Let's clarify what a 1D convolutional layer is doing. Usually when we think of image processing AI, we think of 2D or 3D spatial mapping.
Right, but mapping a full 3D point cloud of a room in real time requires immense computational power. A 1D convolutional layer is much lighter. Instead of looking at a 3D picture, it slides a mathematical filter across a sequence of time steps. It looks at how the signal changes chronologically.
Oh, I see.
Think of it like listening to a musical melody rather than looking at a painting. It maps the temporal dependencies, the specific rhythm of a humor walking or a hand waving.
So block 1 uses the high-definition 60 gigahertz data to confidently identify the rhythm of the movement. It says, based on this crystal clear chronological data, I am highly confident this is a human adult walking across the room and not a golden retriever.
It performs what the researchers call a coarse pre-classification. By confidently narrowing down what is happening in the room using the high-res data, it dramatically reduces the overall mathematical complexity of the problem. Then it passes that highly confident pre-classification output into block 2.
And block 2 is where the fusion happens.
Yes. Block 2 merges that pre-classified 60 gigahertz insight with the continuous ongoing data stream from the 5 gigahertz band. This is where the magic happens. Imagine a person is walking across the living room in full view of the 60 gigahertz sensor. The system is tracking their gait with millimeter precision.
Okay.
Then the person walks into the hallway, moving behind a solid wall. The 60 gigahertz line of sight is instantly broken. The millimeter wave data goes completely dark.
But the system doesn't lose track of the person.
Because block 2 smoothly transitions reliance to the 5 gigahertz data. The 5 gigahertz waves are easily penetrating that hallway wall. The resolution drops. The system can no longer see the micro movements of their fingers, but it maintains a continuous understanding of their presence, their general location, and their microscopic movement.
Seamless.
And as soon as the person re-enters the living room, clearing the wall, the 60 gigahertz sensor reacquires line of sight, and the system seamlessly upgrades back to high-resolution tracking.
It is a continuous, invisible symphony of frequency handoffs. It gives the smart environment persistent, uninterrupted perception regardless of the physical obstacles.
Absolutely.
But, a neural network running smoothly on a high-end computer in a university lab is one thing. Translating that into the real world is an entirely different beast. If you want this complex, multi-band, multi-device symphony to work globally, where a router built by Qualcomm has to coordinate sensing handoffs with a laptop built by Intel while talking to a smart light bulb built by a third company, you cannot rely on proprietary closed-loop science experiments.
You need a universal language. The industry recognized that the lack of a unified standard was the massive bottleneck preventing this technology from leaving the lab. Before standardization, Wi-Fi sensing was a fragmented, heavily improvised field.
The Wild West.
Totally. Researchers had to write highly customized firmware. They had to hunt down specific legacy Intel network cards that accidentally allowed access to the channel state information. They had to artificially inject traffic into the network just to create enough echoes to measure. It was brilliant, scrappy science, but it was fundamentally unscalable.
It's the difference between speaking a highly localized private slang with a few friends in a basement versus publishing a global standardized dictionary that every single device on the planet can instantly download and understand.
And that global dictionary is the IEEE 802.11bf standard, which achieved final ratification in late 2024.
Huge milestone.
The impact of this standard cannot be overstated. It introduces deeply structured modifications to the very core of how Wi-Fi operates, specifically at the PHY, the physical layer, and the MSC, the medium access control layer.
Let's break down those layers because they are fundamental to how the internet works.
Sure. The PHY layer, the physical layer, is the actual radio wave itself. It dictates how the electromagnetic energy is modulated and transmitted through the air. The standard modifies this layer to optimize the waves specifically for sensing measurements, rather than just data carrying.
Okay, and the AMIG layer.
The MSC layer is the traffic cop. It controls who gets to speak on the network when they speak and how they format their messages. The 802.1BF modifications to the MEC layer define the exact bureaucratic process of how devices ask for sensing data, how they agree to participate, and how they package the results.
It defines the roles and responsibilities. Let's walk through how a sensing session actually unfolds under this new global rulebook. If my living room is preparing to map my location, who is doing what? The standard categorizes the participants into 4 distinct roles.
Yes. You have the sensing initiator, the sensing responder, the sensing transmitter, and the sensing receiver. It is important to visualize this as a flexible architecture. One physical piece of hardware can wear multiple hats simultaneously. The sensing initiator is the device that makes the executive decision to start the process. It says, I need to understand the physical environment right now. The sensing responder is the device that agrees to participate in the session.
Then you have the physical execution of the sensing.
Right. The sensing transmitter is the antenna that actually fires the radio waves into the room. And the sensing receiver is the antenna that listens to the distorted echoes, records the channel state information, and calculates the results.
The standard also dictates who gets to be the boss in these interactions, dividing the communication into 2 main configurations: trigger-based sensing and non-trigger-based sensing. Trigger-based sounds highly orchestrated. I assume the main router is running the show in that scenario.
Yes, trigger-based, or TB sensing, is an AP-initiated process. The access point, your main home router, acts as the maestro. It sends out a polling trigger to all the connected clients in the room, like your smart TV, your thermostat, and your phone. It asks, who is available to help me measure the physical space? The available clients reply, and then the access point orchestrates the transmission of what are called null data packets.
Null data packets, meaning they don't contain any actual internet data.
Precisely, they carry no payload. Their only purpose for existing is to be fired into the room, bounce off the walls and the people, and be measured. The access point fires the null data packets, the clients receive them, measure the distortion, and report the mathematical findings back to the router.
And non-trigger-based sensing flips the script.
Non-trigger-based sensing is client-initiated. Your smartphone might decide it wants to map its immediate surroundings for a specific application, so it acts as the initiator and requests a session with the router.
But this highlights a major practical concern. My smartphone runs on a tiny lithium-ion battery. It has maybe 2 antennas crammed inside a glass case. My router, on the other hand, is plugged directly into the wall, draws limitless AC power, and has a massive array of 8 high-gain antennas. Isn't it incredibly inefficient and taxing for a small, battery-constrained device to do the heavy mathematical lifting of initiating and processing a complex 3D spatial map?
It would be, which is why the engineers designing the 802.11BF standard anticipated that exact bottleneck. They introduced a deeply elegant solution called sensing by proxy. It is designed specifically to protect the power budgets of small Internet of Things devices.
Sensing by proxy.
Yeah. If a small client device, say a battery-powered smart light switch, wants to know if someone is in the room, it does not have to waste its own battery firing radio waves and computing complex phase slopes.
It outsources the heavy lifting.
Exactly. The tiny device acts as the sensing initiator, but it designates the access point, the router, as the proxy. It asks the proxy to act as both the sensing transmitter and the sensing receiver.
But the router does all the work.
The main router, utilizing its limitless wall power and massive antenna array, floods the room with null data packets, listens to its own echoes, processes the heavy channel state information math, and then simply sends a tiny, lightweight processed report back to the light switch.
It's essentially the light switch whispering, "Hey router, I don't have the energy to look. Can you tell me if there's a human walking toward me?" And the router does all the complex radar math and replies with a simple, "Yes, one human approaching." That is an incredibly efficient architecture.
It really is.
But outsourcing all this radar math to the main router brings up another critical concern. If my router is constantly busy firing off null data packets, measuring phase slopes, and acting as a proxy radar for every smart device in my house, doesn't that fundamentally degrade its primary job, Am I sacrificing my internet bandwidth and dealing with buffering on my 4K movie stream just so the router can watch me breathe?
It is the most common fear when discussing ISAC, but the empirical stress tests detailed in the research prove it is largely unfounded. The architecture is designed for coexistence. Researchers placed 800 or 2.1 BF systems under severe, heavy data traffic loads. They pushed 500 megabits per second of continuous, heavy data traffic through the network using standard stress testing tools.
Half a gigabit of continuous data. That is heavy downloading.
And even under that massive communication load, the sensing capabilities barely flinched. The time it took for the system to passively collect, process, and output the 5 gigahertz sensing signals remained incredibly stable, clocking in at around 0.83 seconds.
So it still maps the room in less than a second, even while handling massive data transfers. How does it avoid tripping over itself?
It relies on piggybacking. Rather than causing the internet to send a radar ping, passive sensing often reuses the preamble fields and the channel state information naturally generated by the regular data packets that are already flying through the air.
Oh, I get it.
The sensing mechanisms just quietly eavesdrop on the data traffic that is already happening. The degradation to your internet performance is statistically negligible.
So we have the physics figured out, we have multiband neural networks, elegantly fusing different frequencies, and crucially, as of late 2024, we have a ratified global rulebook that ensures coexistence without destroying our internet speeds. With the rules established and the silicon manufacturers catching up, this technology is rapidly transitioning from academic white papers into consumer reality. Let's look at the market projections from our sources, because they indicate a technology that is about to achieve massive, ubiquitous scale.
The economic data is staggering. The projections show the Wi-Fi sensing market valued at roughly $2.3 billion currently in 2025. But by 2034, just 9 years from now, it is projected to explode to an $18.4 billion market, expanding at a massive compound annual growth rate of nearly 23%.
Wow.
This is not a niche feature, it is a foundational infrastructure upgrade.
Let's break down exactly where those $18 billion are being deployed. The largest segment of the market, accounting for nearly 32% of the projected revenue, is smart homes. What does a smart home powered by 802.18 MeAF actually look like in practice? How does it differ from the smart homes we have today?
The goal is true ambient intelligence. Right now, smart homes are incredibly brittle. They rely on passive infrared sensors, or PIRs, to detect occupancy. A PIR sensor detects the heat signature of movement, but they require strict line of sight.
Yeah.
If you walk into a room, the PIR sees you and turns on the lights. But if you sit down in a high-back chair and read a book, remaining relatively still, the PIR sensor thinks the room is empty and plunges you into darkness.
We've all experienced waving our arms frantically in an office conference room trying to get the motion sensors to turn the lights back on.
Right, it's terrible. With Wi-Fi sensing, that brittle experience disappears. The room knows you are there, even if you're perfectly still behind a piece of furniture, because the 5 gigahertz field is continuously detecting the rhythmic millimeter expansion of your chest as you breathe. The ambient environment is perpetually aware of your presence.
That's a game changer.
This translates to massive efficiencies for occupancy-aware HVAC and lighting systems. The system isn't guessing if a room is empty. It knows exactly how many biological bodies are in the space, and it directs heating and cooling accordingly.
And the economic impact of that efficiency is tangible. The market research notes that this level of true occupancy-aware HVAC yields 12% to 18% in energy savings, which translates to roughly $200 to $400 in utility savings per household annually. The technology literally pays for itself.
Absolutely.
But while saving money on heating is great, the application that has the most profound, life-altering societal impact is healthcare. The data shows this is the fastest-growing segment of the Wi-Fi sensing market.
It is driven by unavoidable demographic realities. We have a rapidly aging global population, and the healthcare system is deeply strained. The primary hurdle in elder care monitoring is what clinicians call the compliance burden.
The compliance burden.
Traditional monitoring requires the patient to actively participate. Elderly patients have to remember to wear their fall detection pendants, or they have to charge their smartwatches. And crucially, they often take these devices off to shower or sleep, which are exactly the environments where catastrophic falls or medical emergencies most frequently occur.
And placing a standard surveillance camera in someone's private bathroom or bedroom strips them of their dignity. It is an unacceptable privacy violation for most people.
Wi-Fi sensing elegantly solves this profound dilemma. Because the 5 gigahertz waves penetrate drywall and wooden doors, the router in the hallway can monitor the bathroom without ever generating a visual image. If an elderly person slips and falls, the system instantly detects the sudden, rapid vertical change in their spatial RF signature. It is remarkably precise. Clinical studies analyzing Wi-Fi fall detection demonstrate greater than 95% sensitivity with the ability to detect a fall and trigger an emergency alert in just 0.3 to 0.8 seconds.
Detecting a fall and calling for help in less than a second, through a closed door without the patient wearing anything.
And its capabilities extend far beyond fall detection. Because the system can measure microdoppler signatures, it can monitor chronic health conditions entirely passively. A Wi-Fi access point in a nursing home bedroom can monitor a patient for sleep apnea, analyzing their respiratory patterns throughout the night. It can detect the onset of respiratory distress without attaching a single wire or electrode to the patient's body.
That is just incredible.
The efficacy of this is so well proven that the regulatory bodies are already adapting. In 2024, the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, updated their reimbursement codes specifically to include RF-based remote physiological monitoring. That regulatory change is the definitive green light for mass deployment across the healthcare sector.
It is genuinely revolutionary, and the adoption curve is spreading across multiple industries. The automotive sector is integrating this technology for in-cabin sensing. I noted in the reports that the EU General Safety Regulations are now mandating child presence detection systems in new vehicles to prevent hot car deaths.
Yes.
Traditionally, automakers had to install extensive, heavy, dedicated radar modules into the roof of the car. Now they can simply use the car's existing Wi-Fi hotspot hardware, utilizing an 802.1BF firmware update to detect the tiny breathing patterns of a child or a pet left in the back seat, even if they are deeply asleep and hidden under a thick blanket.
The commercial and enterprise applications are scaling just as rapidly. Retailers are deploying this for advanced footfall tracking and queue detection. They want granular data on how many people are in the store, which aisles they linger in, and how fast the checkout lines are moving.
Right, optimization.
Security and infrastructure firms are using it for perimeter protection. A Wi-Fi sensing array can detect an intruder moving through a pitch-black, darkened warehouse where traditional optical cameras would be entirely blind. And from a deployment standpoint, it is incredibly attractive to corporations because it is estimated to be 40% to 60% cheaper to deploy than a dedicated camera network. You are simply upgrading the software on the Wi-Fi access points that the IT department already needed to purchase for internet access anyway.
Okay, I have to push back on this timeline though. If this technology is 60% cheaper than cameras, if it can save lives in nursing homes, if it can save hundreds of dollars a year in home energy costs, and the physics are sound, why isn't my house doing it right now? Why aren't my smart bulbs tracking my respiration as we speak?
It comes down to the unavoidable friction of hardware life cycles. Software can be updated overnight, but silicon takes time.
The chips.
Right. The IE 802.11BF standard was only fully ratified in late 2024. While there are some proprietary early-stage precursors on the market, the true standardized silicon, the specific integrated circuits manufactured by giants like Qualcomm, Broadcom, and Intel that natively support the full 802.1BF feature set are targeting 2026 and 2027 for mass market tapeouts.
So we're basically there.
The hardware takes a few years to percolate through the global supply chain. We are sitting right at the precipice. Your very next router upgrade, likely your transition to a Wi-Fi 7 or Wi-Fi 8 device, will almost certainly have this sensing capability baked deep into the silicon by default. We are at the exact tipping point of mass adoption.
It sounds like a technological utopia. We get all the safety benefits of constant monitoring, all the convenience of true ambient intelligence, with none of the creepy, intrusive cameras watching us in our private spaces. But what if the absence of a camera is merely providing us with a very dangerous, false sense of privacy?
And that's the big question.
This brings us to the darker implications of our deep dive. If my physical body is constantly perturbing radio waves, just by existing in a room, who else can read those ripples?
This is where we must transition from marveling at a technological triumph to confronting a chilling reality. The very physics that make this technology so powerful also make it profoundly vulnerable. We have to discuss the BFI attack.
Right.
It stands for Beamforming Feedback Identifier, and it is a stark, undeniable exposure of the privacy paradox inherent in Wi-Fi sensing.
Let's set the scene for this vulnerability. What exactly did the security researchers do to expose this flaw?
A team of researchers at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology set out to prove that you do not need military-grade hardware to exploit this ambient telemetry. They set up an attack using entirely ordinary commodity hardware.
Stuff you can just buy.
They used a standard off-the-shelf TP-Link router, and they paired it with standard Intel Wi-Fi cards. They did not build a specialized radar array. They simply used a laptop to passively record a very specific, mundane type of Wi-Fi transmission called a beamforming feedback matrix, or a BFM frame.
We discussed beamforming earlier when we talked about the 60 gigahertz band, the lighthouse steering the signal to find the target.
Yes, but beamforming is also heavily used in the sub-7 gigahertz bands to optimize data connections. When your router wants to send a massive data file to your laptop, it wants to focus its energy directly at the laptop rather than blasting it everywhere.
Make the connection stronger.
To do this, the router sends out a sounding frame. Your laptop receives it, measures exactly how the channel is distorted, and then replies to the router with a beam-forming feedback matrix. The laptop is essentially telling the router, here's the exact mathematical angle and phase you need to configure your antennas to hit me perfectly.
And let me guess, the fatal flaw, that BFM frame, which contains a highly detailed mathematical map of the physical space, the physical distortions, and any human standing between the laptop and the router, is broadcast completely in plain text.
It is broadcast entirely unencrypted over the air. It is a fundamental legacy part of the Wi-Fi protocol design. The engineers who designed it prioritized speed and low overhead to keep the internet fast. They never anticipated it would be used as a radar map.
Wow.
Because it is unencrypted, a passive sniffer, an attacker sitting quietly in the corner of a coffee shop or in a parked car outside an office, can capture these frames out of thin air. They do not need the Wi-Fi password, they do not need to authenticate to the network, they just listen.
So the attacker easily captures this raw radio fluctuation data. It's just a bunch of phase shifts and mathematical matrices. How do they turn that math into an identity?
They leverage artificial intelligence. The researchers took those captured, unencrypted BFM frames and fed them into a recurrent neural network. A recurrent neural network excels at analyzing sequential data over time. As a person walks through the space between the router and a laptop, their moving body constantly alters the radio reflections.
Right.
The laptop constantly updates the BFM frames to compensate for the moving human. The neural network analyzes the chronological sequence of those tiny mathematical adjustments.
It analyzes the rhythm of the disruption.
Precisely. As you walk, your arms swing, your legs step, your torso shifts. All of these generate specific microdoppler signatures that alter the BFM. The neural network found that these radio perturbations are as unique as a fingerprint.
That's terrifying.
The researchers demonstrated that they could identify specific individuals based solely on their unique walking style and gait signature pulled from these passive Wi-Fi echoes, and they achieved an identification accuracy of 99.5%.
99.5%. I mean, that is not just detecting that someone is in the room. That is biometric identification. It is fingerprinting the exact physical mechanics of how a specific human being walks using invisible radio waves that are leaking out of a standard home router. So, to be clear, this isn't like someone hacking my smartphone to track my GPS. My physical body is constantly casting a highly detailed, identifiable radio shadow, and anyone with a cheap antenna can just take a picture of it.
That is the profound, unsettling privacy shift we must grapple with. Historically, the entire concept of digital tracking relied on the device. Retailers tracked the MSC address of the phone in your pocket, or they pinged your Bluetooth beacons.
If you wanted to vanish, you turned your phone off, or you left it at home. You severed the digital tether.
But with the advent of Wi-Fi sensing, the biological body itself becomes the telemetry. You do not need to be connected to the Wi-Fi network. You don't even need to own a digital device. Your physical mass simply has to disturb the ambient RF field, while other devices in the environment happen to be communicating with each other.
It redefines the boundary of digital surveillance. You cannot turn off your physical body. And the terrifying aspect of the sub-7 gigahertz band is that this leakage doesn't respect physical boundaries. The walls of your house don't protect you. The literature highlights a study presented at NDSS 2025 called the Leaky Beam Study.
The Leaky Beam study is a perfect illustration of the threat vector. The researchers demonstrated that this unencrypted beam-forming feedback information retains an incredible amount of movement data even after the radio wave passes through the structural walls of a building. They showed that an attacker standing outside a residence on a public sidewalk up to 20 meters away could capture these leaked packets radiating from the home's router.
Through the walls.
From the street, the attacker could infer the exact occupancy of the house and deduce specific activities happening behind closed doors.
An attacker on the sidewalk knows exactly which room I'm walking into, simply by listening to my router try to maintain a connection with my smart TV. If our physical bodies are generating this highly identifiable radio telemetry simply by existing in a room, how do we prevent our homes, our offices, and our cities from becoming invisible panopticons? I mean, the global rulebook needs a massive security patch.
The engineering and standardization communities are acutely aware of the existential threat this poses to the technology's adoption, and they are aggressively developing technological defenses. One of the most promising architectural mitigations discussed in the recent literature is a framework called FPNet.
FPNet, how does that framework operate? Is it just a matter of slapping heavy encryption onto the ripples?
Encryption is part of the solution, but FPNet goes much deeper into the architecture of the data itself. It acts as an intelligent auto-encoding filter at the source. FPNet is a deep learning framework designed to compress the BFM feedback before it is ever transmitted. It analyzes the raw channel state information and intentionally strips away data. It transmits only the coarse, macro-level features that the router needs to maintain a fast internet connection and perform basic beamforming.
So it gives the router enough data to do its day job, but nothing more.
Exactly. Crucially, the FPNet algorithm mathematically filters out and destroys the fine-grained microphase variations. It intentionally obliterates the exact high-frequency data points that reveal the micro-Doppler signatures of human gait and breathing.
Wow.
It is a brilliant form of privacy through data destruction. It degrades the biometric fidelity of the signal before it ever leaves your laptop's antenna, rendering it useless to an attacker even if they intercept it.
It's conceptually similar to aggressively blurring the faces in a photograph before you send it across the internet.
Yeah.
Even if the photo is intercepted in transit, the identity is fundamentally unrecoverable. Beyond FPNet compression, what other safeguards are being built into the 802.1 Bunny F standard?
Well, the standard introduces several mandatory governance protocols. First is strict session authorization. In older Wi-Fi regimes, a device could silently interrogate another device's channel state. Under 802.1 Bunny F, devices must cryptographically authenticate and formally agree to a sensing session before any high-resolution data is exchanged. Second, the standard introduces active signal obfuscation.
Meaning they're intentionally muddying the waters.
Yes. Transmitters can inject synthetic mathematical noise into the beam-forming feedback frames. It is a carefully calibrated disruption, just enough noise to confuse and scramble an attacker's neural network trying to read your gate, but not enough to ruin the router's ability to maintain the data connection. And finally, there are strict data minimization protocols that restrict the hardware to using the lowest frequency and the lowest spatial resolution necessary for the specific task at hand. If the thermostat just needs to know if a room is occupied, the system locks out the high-resolution 60 gigahertz millimeter wave data entirely.
These mathematical defenses, the compression, the noise injection, they're incredibly clever. But looking at the broader societal picture, can we really rely on firmware updates and compression algorithms to protect our fundamental privacy? Or does the reality of this technology require a total rethinking of how we legally define the word surveillance? Because one of the most astute points raised in the sources is that the BFI paper wasn't just a cybersecurity team showing off a cool mathematical hack. It was explicitly described as a standards governance paper in disguise.
And that gets to the absolute crux of the societal challenge we are facing. If a standard $100 Wi-Fi router purchased at a big box store can act as a biometric surveillance tool capable of fingerprinting your gate with 99.5% accuracy, the legal and regulatory line between ordinary network equipment and regulated surveillance equipment is completely obliterated. Think about the immediate temptation in a corporate workplace environment.
Oh, the workplace is the perfect storm for this. Employers already have dense Wi-Fi networks installed everywhere to provide internet access.
Under the totally benign guise of HVAC optimization or space utilization analytics, a company could push a silent firmware update to their office routers. Suddenly, the IT infrastructure is a high-resolution tracking grid.
And the Human Resources Department suddenly has granular data on which employees gather together frequently at the water cooler, who visits the desk of a known union organizer, who takes slightly longer bathroom breaks, or who leaves their desk to go to a private medical clinic. And all of this is happening without a single security camera being purchased, installed, or declared. It is just the ambient office Wi-Fi doing its job.
Which highlights the immense governance gap. A specialized surveillance camera is highly visible. It is purchased from a specific security budget, it is installed by security personnel, and its presence is usually heavily regulated by workplace privacy laws, union contracts, and mandatory signage rules. People know they are being watched.
Right.
A Wi-Fi access point is categorized entirely differently. It is basic IT infrastructure. When that infrastructure silently becomes a biometric sensor, the existing regulatory frameworks are entirely unprepared to govern its use. This is why the engineering community is so focused on embedding privacy directly into the physics and mathematics of the signal via standards like 802.11bf. Policy language and legislative action simply move far too slowly to catch up with the capabilities of the hardware.
It represents a profound dual-edged sword. On one side, we are unlocking this magical, invisible ocean of perception that can detect an elderly grandfather falling in his bathroom in a fraction of a second, automatically calling an ambulance and potentially saving millions of lives and billions of dollars in medical costs. It can optimize the energy grid, turn off the lights in empty rooms, and instantly detect a child forgotten in a sweltering car.
Yes.
But on the exact same token, it fundamentally turns our physical bodies into broadcast beacons of identifying telemetry, readable through the walls of our homes by commodity consumer electronics.
It is the ultimate evolution of the connected world. We started with the Internet of Computers, moving data between mainframes. We evolved to the Internet of Things, connecting our light bulbs and thermostats. We are now entering the era of the Internet of Beings.
The Internet of Beings.
We are no longer just interacting with the network by tapping on a glass screen. Our very physical presence, our biological mass, and our involuntary microscopic movements have become native inputs to the network's data stream. The ratification of the IE 802.11bf standard guarantees that this technology will scale globally. The market projections, driving toward $18.4 billion by 2034, ensure that the massive economic incentives are aligned for ubiquitous deployment.
It's happening.
The physics have been proven, the global standard is written, the silicon is being stamped. The only remaining variable is how society chooses to govern the invisible waves that surround us.
We've taken a massive deep dive today into the invisible, vibrating ocean of Wi-Fi sensing. We started by exploring the fundamental physics of channel state information, unpacking how engineers mathematically measure phase slopes to track time of flight, and how they analyze microdoppler shifts to turn everyday routers into highly sensitive instruments capable of reading our respiration.
Yep.
We looked closely at the battle of the frequencies, detailing how brilliant multiband AI models like Milagro are elegantly fusing the broad, wall-penetrating vision of 5 GHz waves with the ultra-high-definition precision of 60 GHz millimeter waves. We unpacked how the IE 802.101 standard is writing the definitive global rulebook to choreograph this invisible symphony without destroying our internet speeds, creating an ecosystem poised to reach $18.4 billion, fundamentally transforming elder care, ambient smart homes, and automotive safety.
But we also directly confronted the chilling reality exposed by the BFI attack. We examined the undeniable proof that our unique physical presence, the very rhythm of our walking gait, can be identified with 99.5% accuracy through walls using the unencrypted radio feedback constantly bouncing around us. It is a technological leap that demands rigorous, mathematically embedded safeguards like FPNet data compression and strict signal obfuscation to ensure our private spaces do not become invisible panopticons.
Which leaves us with a profound philosophical and legal puzzle to ponder as we wrap up today's exploration. I want you, the listener, to deeply consider the concept of a right to RF privacy. Imagine a scenario. A Wi-Fi signal originates in a public space, perhaps from a municipal router in a public park or a coffee shop across the street. That electromagnetic wave naturally propagates outward. It crosses the property line and passes directly through the physical walls of your private home. As you walk across your living room, or as your chest rises and falls while you sleep in your bed, your physical body alters that public signal. It changes the phase, it alters the frequency.
The ripple.
The wave then bounces back out through the wall, back into the public street. If a neighbor's device or a data broker parked in a car on the street passively records how your private breathing altered that public signal, whose data is that, the historical boundary between public airwaves and private bodily telemetry has officially vanished. So what does the concept of behind closed doors actually mean when the doors themselves are completely transparent to the invisible ocean of waves all around us?
It forces us to reevaluate our deepest assumptions. That comforting binary understanding of perception we discussed at the beginning, the idea that you are only seen if a camera lens has a line of sight, is truly a relic of the past. The diagnostic landscape of our own privacy is now permanently immersed in these complex, invisible waters.
The invisible geometry of the room sees you. Until next time, stay curious.